The old wooden church stood glowing in the late afternoon sun, filled with townsfolk dressed in their finest. But instead of joy, an uneasy excitement buzzed through the pews. Eyes turned, not to the groom, but toward the entrance where the bride stood, her delicate hands clasped nervously. She was beautiful, radiant even, but silent. Is she deaf? Someone whispered. She won't even hear her own vows, another chuckled softly. A group of young women smirked, hiding their laughter behind lace fans. Men exchanged glances, nudging each other as if this wedding were a spectacle rather than a sacred union. To them, the silence was strange, unfitting for a celebration. The bride, Emma, couldn't hear the whispers, but she felt their stares. She saw the pity in some eyes, the cruel amusement in others. Her breathing quickened. Her fingers trembled around the small bouquet of wildflowers. Then she turned her head toward the front of the church, toward him. Caleb Turner, the rancher known across 3 counties for his strength, grit, and quiet honor, stood tall beside the pastor. His eyes locked on Emma's, steady, unwavering, protective. The chatter faded in her mind. In that gaze, she didn't see judgment, only love. Still, the murmurs swelled behind her like a rising tide. Why would a man like Caleb marry her? Someone whispered loudly enough for all to hear. Emma took a hesitant step forward. Caleb's jaw tightened. What happened next would silence the entire town. As Emma walked slowly down the aisle, the whispers turned to giggles. One woman leaned toward another and muttered, "She won't even hear if he ever says, 'I love you,' what a joke of a marriage." A ripple of laughter followed. Another voice chimed in just loud enough, "Maybe he married her because she can't argue back." Emma's steps faltered. Though she could not hear their words, she saw their lips move, saw the smirks, the narrowed eyes, the mocking glances exchanged like arrows. Her face flushed with heat. For a moment, she wished she could disappear, fade into the glowing churchlight and escape the humiliation pressing in on her. She clutched the bouquet tighter. But then she noticed something else. Caleb stepped forward, not waiting at the altar as tradition dictated, but walking toward her, each step powerful, unbreakable. His eyes never left hers. The crowd murmured with confusion. He reached her halfway down the aisle. Slowly, reverently, he extended his arm. Emma's breath caught. Caleb gently placed her hand on his forearm, like a knight escorting a queen. The room fell into a hush. He turned and looked directly at the rows of townsfolk. His expression was calm, but his eyes held fire. In that silence, every person felt the weight of their own shame, though none yet realized what he would say. And then he took the first step, leading her, not as a bride to be pitied, but as a woman he honored above all others. Caleb paused at the center of the aisle, his hand still resting over Emma's, steady and sure. The guests sat in stiff silence, their earlier laughter now dying in their throats. Reverend Thompson hesitated at the altar, sensing something powerful was about to unfold. Caleb turned to face the crowd. Though Emma could not hear his voice, she could see the strength in his eyes. She could read his lips, and in that moment, that was enough. With a voice firm as thunder rolling over the plains, he said, "I know what many of you whispered today." A collective tension gripped the room. "You mock her because she cannot hear," he continued, his gaze sweeping across each uneasy face, "but let me tell you this, Emma hears more than any of you ever will." A man in the back shifted, eyes downcast. Caleb lifted Emma's hand, placing it gently over his heart. "She hears truth here," he said, pressing her palm to his chest. "She hears kindness through action, loyalty through silence, and love in ways you shallow people could never understand." Gasps fluttered across the room. Emma's eyes shimmered with tears, not of pain, but of awe. Caleb straightened, voice rising with conviction. "She is better than all of you who judge her. Better because she sees with her soul. And I, Caleb Williams, am honored she chose me." Not a single person dared speak. For the first time, the crowd truly looked at the bride, not as someone broken, but as someone deeply treasured. Reverend Thompson, visibly moved, cleared his throat and nodded gently for them to begin their vows. Caleb turned fully toward Emma. The room was silent, no whisper, no laughter, only anticipation. Emma held a small folded paper in her trembling hands. She had spent hours writing her vows, unsure if she would be brave enough to read them aloud. Caleb reached out, gently taking the paper and setting it aside. He signed lovingly with his hands. No paper, only truth. Emma's breath caught. The entire room watched in awe as Caleb began signing while speaking, ensuring every word reached her heart. "Emma," he said softly, "this world sees your silence as weakness. But I have seen your silence become my peace. I have heard your strength in the way you keep going, even when no one speaks your language. Today, I vow to speak it with you, for the rest of my life." Emma's eyes overflowed. The audience shifted emotionally, their expressions warming, some wiping tears. She lifted her hands and began to sign her vow. Her fingers were steady. Her eyes were firm. "You listened," she signed, "when no one else did. You made me feel not broken, but chosen. I cannot hear your heartbeat, but I feel it. I will follow it wherever it leads." Caleb translated her signs aloud so every person in the room could hear the power of her words. By the time she finished, half the room was in tears. For the first time, the deaf bride stood not in shame, but in undeniable grace and strength. As the Reverend prepared to pronounce them husband and wife, a man suddenly stood up from the crowd. It was Thomas Barlow, a wealthy cattleman known for his arrogance. He had been the loudest voice mocking Emma earlier. "This is ridiculous," he yelled. "A deaf woman is a rancher's wife. She can't even hear danger coming. Caleb, you're ruining your legacy." Gasps rose across the room. Emma lowered her head, old fears flickered in her heart. But Caleb stepped forward, shoulders squared, eyes burning with resolve. He turned toward the crowd, voice steady and powerful. "Danger," Caleb said. "The only danger in this town is ignorance." He pointed toward Emma. "She hears more than you ever will, not with ears, but with her heart, her instincts, her courage. And if anyone here thinks she is less because she is deaf." He paused, scanning every face in the room. "You are not welcome on my land, at my table, or in my life." Silence fell like a stone. Then, unexpectedly, the bride's little sister, also deaf, stood and began to clap her hands together in the air. Others followed, lifting their hands in the deaf sign for applause. One by one, the entire room raised their hands, silently cheering her. The Reverend smiled warmly. "By the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife." Caleb signed the words as he spoke them aloud, and when he lifted Emma's veil, tears spilled down her cheeks, not of sorrow, but of triumph. They kissed, not just as bride and groom, but as two souls who had overcome the world's judgment, together. And in that moment, the town understood. The deaf bride had never been weak, she had been destiny, waiting for a man strong enough to hear her silence.